welcome everybody, and good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're located. My name is Jason Tebow. I'm the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance and your moderator for today's webinar titled Methodologies and Mechanisms for Keeping Online Video Secure. This is a really exciting webinar. Obviously, in our industry, we've got a lot of attention on stream piracy and online video piracy and how to stop it and prevent it. And I've got with me today 4 experts in online security, from different aspects of the industry. So this is going to be a really great discussion, and I think a lot of useful and helpful information will be unearthed and uncovered as part of our discussion. So a couple of things. First, housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded. We will try and post the recording on our Streaming Video Alliance website and YouTube a little bit later today, and tomorrow, I think it's 24 hours after the webinar is over, people who were unable to attend will receive an email notification. So we'll send out an email as well with information about the link to that video so that you can send it to colleagues who are unable to join, or to people who you think might be interested. Now, just a little bit about the Streaming Video Alliance. So if you're not familiar with us, we are sort of global trade association that really focuses in on 3 things around online video. So the first is about education. We are focused on trying to help the industry understand what the challenges are to get better user experience for streaming video. So again, one of those issues and challenges being stream piracy and security. The second thing is we're focused on collaboration. So we provide a forum for companies from around the ecosystem to come join together and work with each other to help solve those problems and challenges. And then finally, we focus in on definition, and that is we try to define solutions to the problems. And when we do, we publish out specifications or best practices or guidelines. As a matter of fact, we just published one today, which was forensic watermarking implementation challenges for streaming media. It's available on our website. And it's a really great document about forensic watermarking and what you need to consider as you think about implementing that kind of technology solution. All right, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to allow our panelists to introduce themselves a little. So I will just briefly name them off, and then they can talk about themselves for about a minute or so, and then we'll jump into the questions that we have prepared for today. So let's start off with Peter from Verimatrix.
Hello, everybody. I am Peterka. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Verimatrix. As you probably know, we are providing all of the technology for content protection for pay TV operators. It includes conditional access system. It includes digital rights management system and forensic watermarking. We also support a third-party DRM systems, such that an operator can really put together a comprehensive system that addresses all possible devices, all different network types, and can reach their audience wherever they are and whatever device they are on.
Fantastic, thank you. Next is Juan from Irdeto.
Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Juan Martinez. I'm Senior Product Manager for Irdeto. I'm responsible for the Irdeto products related to OTT content protection. I'm based in Amsterdam, originally from Spain. I work in companies such as Philips, Cision, and Liberty Global. Basically, just to give a quick background on Irdeto, we basically, as a company, have been there for many, many years. And we protect our client businesses and brands by securing digital assets. And that goes from services to provide media and entertainment protection, but as well as connected transport and IoT connected industries. And that's in a nutshell.
All right, James from Edgeware.
Hi, thanks, JT. I'm James Kirby. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions Architecture here at Edgeware. I would class myself as not one of the 4 experts. I'm probably half an expert, I guess, on online security. Edgeware being heavily focused on TV CDNs and obviously delivering that streaming media across the internet to our customers, be they telcos or end subscribers of broadcasters. So obviously our solutions touch very closely into those provided by all of the other attendees, the other panelists here on the panel today, which is where I fit into this from an ecosystem perspective. We also have some interesting solutions around forensic watermarking that we've been working with various partner companies on, enabling us to put that into the CDN infrastructure.
Fantastic. And finally, Jaap from Nexguard.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Jaap Haitsma. I work with Nagra. Nagra provides very broad solutions in the security space, CAS, DRM, and also the watermarking. I'm CTO of Nexguard, which is the watermarking technology of Nagra, and I'm also heading Nagra anti-piracy services, where basically for customers we monitor the web and IPTV services for illegal restreaming, and then help our customers to take these services down.
Fantastic. All right, so it's really great to have you guys all here today. I think obviously, like I said before, stream piracy and online content, security is becoming a real hot button in our industry, especially as live becomes more prominent and sporting events even more so, which obviously are tied to very expensive rights, for specific territories that obviously the content owners need to protect, and they want to create a better user experience for their viewers and subscribers, and keeping them secure is obviously an important part of that. So, let's start out kind of with a question at the high level, and I'm not going to necessarily target this to a specific person, although maybe James, maybe you'd be perfect to talk about this because you're kind of in the middle of the mix. But what is the state of streaming video piracy today? How much is being stolen? Is it a lot? Is it a little? What's the impact that it's having on sort of the growth of OTT and the growth of the virtual MVPDs? What's happening today? And let's point that at James. Maybe he's got some ideas on that.
Yeah, as a neutral vendor in that space, I guess I'm well placed to answer. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big secret in that there is a fair amount of streaming video piracy happening. I mean, certainly here in the UK, there's been publicized numbers around the amount of English Premier League soccer matches that are being pirated. Obviously, I think everyone's aware of a small TV show called Game of Thrones, which obviously is also very heavily pirated and has and obviously that was done last year for the last season that was broadcast. So I think it's certainly a problem that is growing. Obviously, as people start to deliver more content outside of a closed managed network, sort of a traditional IPTV network and a telco network or a cable network. Once you start going over the internet or delivering content truly OTT, then obviously there's a lot more visibility of that content, and also, I guess, availability of that content as well. So as more broadcasters and content providers start to go down that route, then obviously we see a lot more pirated content being made available, or certainly we hear about a lot more pirated content being made available. So it's certainly something that we have to address. Obviously, the three co-panelists here have obviously all got their great solutions in that space, and I think it's something that, as technology vendors, I think we're getting a good handle on, but it's trying to stay one step ahead of the pirates.
Anybody else?
JT, this is Petr.
Yeah, Petr.
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that. I think the technology vendors like Irdeto or Nagra and Verimatrix, we've done a good job in protecting content that is out there. But at the same time, there is more content, more devices, more sources of content, and at the end, more piracy. And video consumption is increasing, but unfortunately, at the same time, video piracy, at least from the statistics that are being published, seems like it's definitely not going down. And one of the aspects of this, or when you look at 5-10 years ago, you had to be a hacker, you had to be a kind of a technologist to figure out how to participate, how to consume pirated content. But these days, the illegal distribution of content seems to be so easy and so prepackaged that I think it's just easier for an average user to participate, and sometimes without even knowing that they are consuming illegal content.
Yeah, I think
I
I think also what you see nowadays, like services available on the internet that look to normal consumers as legal services. You pay money to these services and you get a very good quality of experience, while it is basically just stolen content that they're getting. So these pirates are also getting very professional nowadays.
I mean, it was in this Juan from Irdeto, but it was recently in the news where I think it was a couple that got 5 years in prison because they managed to have a streaming service with over 8,000 illicit streaming devices that they were selling, and they got about $1 million in 2 years, $1 million in about 2 years of revenue out of that business. So it's indeed, as Jaap was mentioning, it's getting more profitable for pirates and looking like legit.
Yeah, I was putting together a presentation today for it's a CDSA event, which is a security association here in New York, and I was looking up stats on piracy, and I found a study that was done in 2016 which predicted that by 2020, stream or video piracy would cost the industry $50 billion, which is just insane. So obviously there are, technologies out there to protect video. So I want to start with one that people are probably most familiar with, which is DRM. When that came out, there was a considerable consumer backlash, right? People didn't like the idea of being tied to a set device after they purchased content. They said, I bought it, I want to be able to watch it where I want to watch it. Do you guys feel that people are more comfortable with DRM today? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Well, probably I can. I'll let you guys answer.
Sorry. So this is Petr. I think people are accepting DRM, and the backlash was initially kind of against the limitations in the behavior that people wanted to do, which really meant copying, let's say, music and copying it from one device to another. I think today's trend in content, especially video content consumption, is really through streaming. And I believe that most people don't even know when they are watching a streaming service that the content is encrypted or that it's protected by DRM. They just, go to the application, select a movie, and they just watch. So I think the backlash is over. As an example, I've never heard anybody saying, I will not sign up for Amazon Prime Video because it's protected by DRM. So I believe it's an accepted technology, and it's not limiting the user experience anymore.
Yeah, indeed. The ownership concept of having a bit of a DVD or a CD has changed. Now everyone is streaming either through services like Netflix, Spotify, or Amazon. So there's no that idea that you want to own that content is not there anymore. And the DRM implementation with all the native DRMs like the Widevine, Fairplay, etc., they become very, very transparent to the user. So they don't have to install anything in particular. They just play and they watch video.
Yeah, I think the key feature is complete transparency, right? Complete transparency and not being an intrusive technology, something that actually allows a user to watch, premium, best content that they can find legally, of course, without even knowing that the content is protected. So convenience and transparency is key.
So that makes a lot of sense. And if that's the case, right, so consumers are more accepting of it because it's transparent, that would make me believe that lots of companies in the industry, lots of OTT services, TVOD providers, whomever they are, would be using DRM. What are some of the considerations when implementing that kind of technology? What do content owners and distributors have to keep in mind when they select a specific DRM to apply to their content?
Well, I can answer that, Juan here. And I think it was just mentioned just now where the transparency. So first of all, it needs to be as transparent as possible to the end user, because the end user, what they want is to access content and be able to watch whatever they desire at any given time. And based on that is the quality of service. So things like video startup time or the video latency, if you're watching live sports. And at the end is like things like device battery consumption if you're on the move. So these are the kind of areas where any operator or content provider should be looking whenever it's deciding to add security, add DRM on top of the content distribution.
If I can add to it, JT, this is Petr. I think the complexity of distributing content is increasing. The operator needs to reach all possible device types, device models, device versions that their end users, their subscribers want to consume their content on. The other part of the complexity is that there's really no one DRM or one security solution that covers 100% of all of the devices. So operators need to deal with a multi-DRM type environment. It used to be easy where they just selected a set-top box vendor and a CA vendor, and one provider was, one CA or DRM vendor was able to protect their entire population of devices. Today, it's much more complex, and some operators have a tendency to maybe try it themselves, but they very quickly realize that the complexity is way more difficult and overwhelming than they thought, and they typically quickly switch to a professional company like one of ours here on the panel.
Yeah, we've seen that quite often, as Petr was mentioning, and a service that is reliable in DRM world is the same as in the conditional access. Whenever you have a blackout, if the DRM service starts failing, you really have black screens. People start complaining, people churn, so it's quite impacting not having a reliable service that can reach all the devices.
I've kind of thrown a little bit of a monkey wrench to that one, right? So obviously live streaming is becoming increasingly important. There is a huge issue of, what we call sort of time behind live, right? The non-synchronization of the OTT live stream to the broadcast stream. How does DRM, does it work for live streaming when there's such a latency concern? And sort of what are the pros and cons of using DRM with live? Or are there other ways to protect a stream, sort of to encrypt a stream without employing something that adds latency to the viewing experience?
Well, let me jump in. This is Petr. I think with live streaming or streaming in general, applying DRM is actually easier than in the older models of downloading content and moving it around, because all of the rights management is actually done on the head end, typically on the server side, and the content is just encrypted and delivered to the end device if the user is a subscriber or if it purchased or rented that content. But the complexity of deciding kind of the old rules of I can play this 3 times or I can copy it to 2 different devices, those complexities are actually going away. So applying DRM to a streaming or live streaming content is easier, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and also, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say certainly from a CDN standpoint and a streaming delivery standpoint, the latency between the live broadcast, you're watching it on a cable set-top box or an IPTV set-top box versus your next door neighbor watching it OTT on an iPad or there are other tablet devices out there, I believe. The use of DRM or other technologies is not hugely impacting that latency between the two. There's a lot more elements within the chain that I would argue would increase the latency of seeing that piece of content being delivered to that end device. And certainly that's something that we have been very heavily focused on in making sure that what we call immediate streaming, that session is available as soon as the content is becoming available from the origin or the repackager or the transcoder. So I don't think, by having a DRM versus no DRM on that live stream is severely impacting the viewing experience.
Okay. So here, let's do this a little bit. I want to jump into sort of the next kind of technology, as well as forensic watermarking. But before we do that, we've had some really good questions come in from the audience, and I kind of want to jump into some of those because they're actually DRM related, so we can keep on the same topic for a little bit. One of the questions that came in was, obviously DRM technology itself has become invisible, but consumers still have to log in to get authenticated, right? So obviously there's that certificate exchange that enables the decryption of the DRM protected content. The question that this audience member asked was, what technical approaches are the companies taking toward protecting against, or defeating credential sharing? So obviously, whether it's DRM or not, if people are sharing their credentials around, lots of, quote unquote, unauthorized users are watching content that they, have not paid for. Do you guys have any thoughts or opinions on that?
This is Juan from Irdeto. So one of the areas we've also been looking quite heavily into the credential sharing issue. And there are two aspects. One is the credential sharing that is willingly and just to share with your friends, and the other is the one that has been more than credential stealing. But if we look at the credential sharing where you can post your own credentials around or share with your family, technologies like concurrent streaming management actually make this sharing a bit more cumbersome or difficult. So if not 20 people can share the credential because they cannot watch at the same time, that credential sharing doesn't become that attractive. So companies and operators can then set the maximum number of streamings that you can watch at any given time. And on the other side is to protect those credentials as well, because those credentials can be leaked if your application is not secure, for example, or the transmission of your credentials to the servers are not protected. Those also can be leaked and then be shared across the internet. But basically, from our perspective, we believe the concurrent streaming management is one of the solutions that will basically stop or limit the credential sharing issue.
I would add two things to it. One is related to actually binding the user credentials to device identities and also authenticating a device, and then you can control how many devices may be associated with a user account. So that's another mechanism that adds to what we just discussed. The other aspect is if those user credentials actually give you buying power, right? If you can actually buy a movie, if it is not just a subscription service, but if it includes transaction VOD, and if you own those credentials and it allows you to spend money, I would be much more careful of sharing my credentials with my friends than if it is just an SVOD where there's no loss for me by sharing.
So another question that came in, another interesting question, was around sort of CMAP and the relationship to multiple DRM systems. So would something like CMAF help with the requirement of multiple DRM systems?
Well, this is Petr again. We've been running what we call a multi-rights system for many years. What that means to us and our customers is that we support not only the Verimatrix DRM, but also third-party DRMs such as PlayReady or Fairplay Streaming or Whitevine. And we put them together in a completely transparent way where the operator doesn't see the complexity of running multiple DRM systems, and the user has a consistent experience across different devices, regardless what DRM is used on that device. And CMAF, or more general common encryption, is one of those steps that the industry has taken over the past several years that make it easier to have a single, ideally a single stream or single file, have it encrypted only once, let's say with common encryption, and then attaching multiple DRM systems that actually deliver the same keys in a different license format or different transaction format. But it certainly saves the operator the cost of either encoding or encrypting content multiple times or storing it multiple times. So CMAF is going in the right direction of unifying the content creation, encoding, delivery, and protection mechanisms.
Okay. All right. We had an audience member also provided an interesting comment, which was that there is the possibility to warm up on pre-delivered DRM licenses, which can help eliminate latency. So I just wanted to to throw that out there as well. And then there's some additional questions in here around encryption and fragmentation, but I think we'll wait till the end to jump to those. I'd like to get to some of the other technologies involved in streaming, because obviously in stream protection, because obviously protection and security there's no silver bullet, right? You've got to have a multifaceted, multi-layered strategy. And so that's kind of what I want to do on this panel, is really talk about some of the technologies that work in concert with each other to create that multifaceted strategy. So let's move on a little bit to something that I have found lots of companies beginning to use, which is HTTPS, to secure the transport of the online video, obviously from the server to the client. So the question I have for you guys is, how important is HTTPS to the future of video streaming? Is this technology something that content distributors like the CDNs or anyone with the CDN, should they deploy regardless of other kinds of video protection methods they're using, or should they should they just rely on it? What are your thoughts on incorporating that into the mix?
I think from my standpoint, from a delivery CDN standpoint, HTTPS is something that we have to support. It shouldn't supplant something like DRM, but it's very much a case of we have to support it, and then it's driven by device type or operator requirements or broadcaster requirements. We just have to be able to support both HTTP and HTTPS with the same level of performance, which is something we can do. I know that there have been issues with some CDNs where HTTPS is more resource consuming, and so therefore the performance drops off. But from an Edgeware standpoint, we have to support both, and we have to do them both equally well.
If I can add, if I can add to that, I mean, we have to remember that HTTPS, it's basically focusing on protecting your secrecy. So as a user, nobody knows what I'm really watching or requesting over the internet. Also integrity, so I know that nobody has modified whatever I'm getting from the internet an authenticity. So I know that that piece of content or whatever of data is coming from wherever I request it from. However, it does not protect your content itself. Once the content is delivered into the device, then it resides in memory, it gets processed, etc. And that's the part where the DRM comes into the game. So you protect the pipe so nobody can look what you're doing, but once it reaches the device, then the stream is available to whoever is running next to your application. So you have to be more careful, and that's the DRM part.
Yeah. I fully agree. It's basically privacy protection for the users. But yeah, you basically see that all the big video services are moving there, and the whole internet is going there. YouTube uses it, Netflix uses it. And yeah, if you see these big technology companies are all also pushing on HTTPS everywhere. So I think in the end, it will be more or less transparent. You just get HTTPS, and it also seems that the cost is basically not significant anymore. That it will be just standard. Everybody will deliver everything over HTTPS in the near future.
Yeah, and the
to make it
devices and
clear,
browsers
it's not a
are-
replacement, right? It's not a replacement for DRM. It's an additional protection, as we discussed. And you may end up with protecting the stream multiple times, but it's similar to if something is streamed over Wi-Fi, and if the Wi-Fi channel is encrypted and you are passing in a stream that is also encrypted by a DRM, you end up with multiple encryptions, but that's just how the internet works.
I've got an interesting question, a follow-up question to the sort of HTTP-based discussion, and it comes from the audience. And what he basically asked was, or pointed out, so the HTTP-based streams are not currently real-time, right? So I think we all understand that. The few options, obviously, for real-time delivery of streaming, currently he's listed out sort of SRT, ZXC, SRTP, RTMPS, things like that, of that nature. His question is, are there other better protocols for streaming that I guess provide the level of security that HTTPS would provide for that, protecting that pipe? Any thoughts on that one?
Well, I mean, from my side, from the I have limited knowledge, I have to say, on the content on let's say the network distribution, but I know that there have been quite a lot of RTMP improvements in the last few years. Things like CMAF again will improve the latency of the delivery, improvements on the CDN as it was mentioned, and certainly there are moves. Moving away from other protocols instead of our RTMP. However, yeah, again, that's an evolution that will happen with the networks being faster and new protocols coming in, and people and devices having to adapt to those. So there's also a restriction. You may change the protocol, but if your devices do not support it, then you are going to have that mix and match. And we see the live streams are being delivered nowadays, and we'll see less and less latency as companies and content distributors focus on improving that latency. I'm sure of that.
And I agree with the fact that HTTP was never designed to be a live streaming protocol, but because of its ubiquity and ease of use, it was adopted by the adaptive bitrate streaming, and it is being improved over time, and I'm pretty sure that for the next few years we'll continue using HTTP.
Yeah, I would agree. Obviously, I think HTTP itself, TCP was never designed for delivering video. That was never the intention. And then now as we move to chunk formats and things like that, we're complicated, as well as, help out some of the issues and challenges with HTTP. So it's interesting to see some of these real-time protocols come into play. Obviously, people using, developing SRT, companies using or going back to things like RTSP. I think the future of streaming is very much up in the air when it comes down to protocol. Obviously, security is a major issue, and RTMP-E had numerous security challenges enough that Adobe recognized that as a major flaw in the protocol. So there's lots of problems that we're going to come into with protocol protection going forward, but it'll be interesting to see where the trade-offs are between sort of the real-time nature that's required for live and the more protected streams that don't care about latency but provide content owners much more peace of mind that their content is encrypted and protected throughout the entire value chain. So
this is really where you want to. This is really where you want to separate the delivery protocols from content protection. You don't want to tie content protection to a particular selection of a protocol. You should have the freedom to choose any of these protocols depending on what your requirements are for speed or latency or multicast or whatever. But the content should be protected independently of that. So this is a good example of where you don't want to tie, let's say, HTTPS and try to replace a DRM with it because you just know it happens to be encrypted. But as we discussed, it's really not a replacement for a DRM.
Exactly. And actually that leads us to sort of this third kind of protection technology, which is forensic watermarking, right? Which is totally independent of any kind of delivery, and it's really about the content itself. So I want to ask you guys at a very high level, is watermarking a deterrent to piracy? Can it prevent stream theft? How do you enforce it? And obviously you guys all have, your respective opinions about this. So let me do this. Let me just start with, I'll start at the top of the list. I'll start with Petr, and then we'll kind of go down, to Juan and Jaap, and then James can maybe jump in at the end. But I'd like to hear from sort of the three guys that are heavily invested in this space to kind of get their understanding about where does watermarking fit into this kind of security strategy. So Petr, if you want to give us a role, that'd be great.
Well, I agree that watermarking has multiple different functions, and one of those functions is just being a deterrent. And what I mean by that is that many people believe that what they do on the internet is anonymous, that nobody can see that, and I think that's also part of why people are willing to, steal content on the internet, but they would never steal anything in a regular store. So knowing that the stream is actually identified with or identifies you as the consumer, and if the user knows that, I think people would be much more careful, especially casual theft. Would certainly go down. So I think that's one of the functions of forensic watermarking. The other one, and really the main one, is the traceability. You have DRM that tries to prevent misuse or theft of content, but if it happens somehow, then watermarking is the mechanism to trace it back to the origin, to the person or to the device where it was stolen from, such that the operator or the content owner can actually, identify that source, disable or deauthorize the subscriber, and then deal with the consequences.
Hey, Juan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure, and I completely agree with Peter. So, but yeah, on top of that, I mean, you have also the fact that you can offer options to disrupt whoever is sharing or redistributing your content. So making the whole content redistribution business more difficult to manage. If you keep offering a service that people are paying, they think is legit, while you're stealing all the content in the background and you get disruptions, and all the time that service is not working, people will stop using it and look for better options with a better quality of service. But also you have like distributor watermarking, where you can find out at the very early stages of your distribution what companies actually leaked your content. So this is very important for companies that are distributing content at the very early stages, maybe to cinemas or to other companies, streaming companies. So then they can also narrow down who are the companies that are not providing the right level of security. So there are many levels where watermarking and quick detection can come into the game in order to make piracy a cumbersome thing, and again, only for the very, very techie people, and not a profitable business that is easy to really to implement.
Okay, this is Jaap. I can add a few things to it. Also, yeah, watermarking is already a very mature technology. The studios and also in digital cinema, the technology is already used for over 15 years to track piracy and to try to prevent piracy. Like any of these technologies, it's not a silver bullet, but yeah, one of the bullets you can use in your arsenal against piracy. And hence we see that the adoption of watermarking is rising. It's now also used in consumer services already for quite a while. And not everywhere yet, but we see more and more interest in also doing that. Sports, big sports leagues are starting to ask for it. Also, studios are asking it for it if you want to get their premium content.
James, have you got anything you want to add to that? If not, I've got another question specifically for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with the other three guys. It's a complementary technology. So yeah, let's head for the next question.
All right. Really quickly, so everybody in the audience, I have posted in the handout section a copy of the published SVA technical document on forensic watermarking. So if you're interested in reading more about the implementation considerations, between single pass and double pass and all other sorts of, technology and considerations around forensic watermarking, please download the document and take a read. And then obviously, use that to help guide your business decision about, how and when to implement this kind of technology into your content protection strategy. All right, James. So, obviously we've talked about a lot of different, technologies with regards to content protection and stream protection. You're in an interesting position from sort of the distribution side. And, you've obviously got to work with a lot of the content owners and the content distributors. And, let me ask you this, is there a conflict between adding more security? So is there a point where you've added too much security, and latency? Is there an inverse proportion to this where, you're basically not getting enough return on the amount of content security you're implementing because the latency is increasing too much? How, and if the answer is yes, how can that be fixed, or how have you seen maybe it be addressed?
I mean, certainly from our standpoint, if you add in forensic watermarking, and we do that at the edge of the CDN, we interface with multi-DRM systems to support the actual encryption of that video payload as well. From our side, there's no significant latency overhead. So as a purely selfish answer, it would be, well, use Edgeware. It would be the best CDN for that solution. But I mean, I think I'm not aware of or haven't seen latency becoming an issue by adding in things like watermarking at the edge of the network. Certainly from our standpoint, it's not something where it consumes anything else, or consumes more resources on our streaming nodes to deliver watermarked content versus non-watermarked content. And that's the way that we're handling that is, we're repackaging at the edge of the network, and it's at that level we're doing the forensic watermarking. So it's essentially part of our repackaging. So there's no additional latency by adding that as a watermarked repackaged stream versus non-watermarked. I think the answer from a content provider and broadcaster standpoint would be, if they can reduce, even if they could reduce piracy by, let's say, 5% by having in DRM and watermarking and HTTPS, then that would be a good payoff for them. If you look at things like, as I mentioned earlier, the English Premier League or Game of Thrones or big live sporting events, if the amount of revenue that is lost, I mean, I think you said $50 billion earlier. I mean, if you can recoup 5–10% of that by adding in watermarking and multi-DRM, then yeah, I think that's a significant chunk of money that comes back into the arms of the content owners and broadcasters. So I think for them it's a worthwhile investment. I don't think that latency would be a worry there. I mean, certainly all the issues around latency, certainly from the CDN side, everyone's trying to reduce as much latency as possible. So that's always going in the right direction. So if you can then obviously reduce the amount of piracy at the same time, then that's a win-win.
All right, we've got about 12 minutes left. We've got some good, some good questions. I don't know if we'll get to all the questions from the audience members, but I will make sure that we get those questions answered if we don't have them addressed during this time. Obviously, besides, let's say besides DRM and watermarking, are there other methods that content owners and distributors can and should use to protect their content against theft? And the question, let me couch that question a little bit. So I was talking to one of our member companies, and I'm not going to mention who it is because I don't want to give away their all their wonderful security trade secrets. But we talked about this, this problem of preventing live stream theft. And, some of the methods that he had talked about as they're moving towards DRM, were things like using CDN tokens or, using identifiers in the URI, using, time-based access. Have you guys come across any, any, I guess, server or player side things that content distributors and content owners should be employing as, kind of ways to prevent content being stolen that are not necessarily provided in the vendor, in the vendor solutions?
I think that one of the trends or tendencies are to be moving from kind of the traditional one-way networks like satellite or one-way cable distribution to two-way IP-based distribution of content, whether it's, IPTV streaming or whether it's OTT streaming. These are all two-way protocols. And what we've been providing our customers with is increased level of monitoring and data collection and data analytics. And you actually realize that you have a very detailed view of your network, whether it's managed or unmanaged. You have different points in the network where you collect a lot of data. And when you put that data together, you actually get a pretty good picture of who's doing what device is connected, what content it's using or consuming. And especially when you apply either basic simple rules, or if you want to be a little more sophisticated and apply machine learning, you find anomalies that indicate either breaches or theft or attempts at breaches that you didn't see before. So I think data collection and analytics is a huge part of an anti-piracy service because you can detect bad behavior or anomalies much more quickly and easily. And we didn't have those tools before.
If I can add to that, and indeed I agree that having the data is always it's always helpful. But going back to the original items where it was mentioned, things like tokenizations, we see more and more operators using tokens in all their implementations. That's now becoming the new trend to ensure the authentication of the devices or the users is protected as well. So these tokens cannot be easily shared between devices. And those tokens can be used for either CDN requests, but also for DRM license requests. And of course, to protect your application, because everything gets down to the application, but you don't know if somebody has hacked that application around and start extracting all the information out of it. So there are quite a lot of layers that you need to add if you do, let's say, the from lens to lens or glass to glass protection from the moment that the content is filmed to the moment that the content is displayed on your screen. There are lots of doors that you need to lock in order to make sure that there's no leakage of your content.
Yeah, and then I think still everybody should do that. But then, yeah, once it is on the screen, people can always make a recording with the camera, and you can make very good recordings with that. Yeah, then, yeah, what you then need to do is, yeah, have watermarking where you can trace where it's coming from, and you need to use anti-piracy services that spider the web, trying to find this illegal content, and then yeah, work with companies that can help you then take this content down. So yeah, there is unfortunately not a silver bullet here. You need to do basically everything to get the best protection.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point somebody made here. One of the audience members, you know, basically said, listen, piracy is going to happen, right? Pirates are going to continue to get smarter and outwit, you know, technologies, and they'll continue to pirate content. You know, so that I read this comment, and I kind of led me to this last question. You know, what's coming down the pipe in terms of security technologies? You know, obviously, as much as you can talk about, knowing that, you know, you guys all have vested interest in protecting, you know, your company's position in the market and things you might be developing. But, you know, is there anything that we can talk about, you know, new technologies, new approaches that are perhaps coming down in the next year or 2 years or 5 years that we can expect to see that might help distributors and owners, again, you know, protect their content against ever increasing attempts at piracy?
What we see is that in some regions you get into IP blocking and these kind of things, that network operators start blocking illegal services, and that legislation there is progressing. So we see that as one of the future things that will happen.
Yeah, and if I can comment as well on the comment that the piracy will happen, and indeed will happen, and that's why every content has to be treated differently. So it's not the same if you're protecting a movie from 1940 than if you're protecting something that just came out last hour, and different technologies should be applied accordingly. And also, what is the value of your content? So do you need to protect with all the bells and whistles a live stream of the cooking channel, or the live sport of the Super Bowl? Is very different. So again, you are not going to watermark every single channel around there if it's not needed, or put all the technologies that you can think of for every single piece of content. So that's something that we are focusing with different technologies, and many of them have been mentioned today, and they are appropriate for each case depending on the value of that content.
Another technology that may be used in hopefully near future is semantic content recognition, which would help with much more automated detection of copyrighted content that is found, you know, in places where it shouldn't be. You know, today we have, you know, databases of content identifiers, or we have fingerprints of content that, let's say, prevent people from uploading copyrighted content to YouTube and other services. But you need to build up that database. If you have a semantic content recognition where the system can be smart enough to actually figure out that, hey, this is a boxing match that should be live, you know, right now, and offered only by a specific operator because they have exclusive rights. If I find it somewhere else, even without anybody putting it into the database, the system should be able to find it and take it down.
And does that, what then is the role of things like AI and machine learning in terms of, being able to automate, maybe it's the analysis of content on the web, maybe it's the extraction of watermarking, maybe it's, some other aspect, but do you guys see these kinds of technologies coming into play with anti-piracy efforts?
Well, on our side,
absolutely.
We've been working for years getting that artificial intelligence, discovering streams, finding out if they are pirated or not. So that you cannot crawl the internet on a manual basis and have a guy looking at the screen to see if it's pirated content or not. That certainly will never work.
Fully agree. And as I mentioned in the past, looking at the vast amounts of data that people collect these days, the amount is so big that you cannot have anybody just sifting through log files and other things. You really need models that can be either trained or they can learn from future behavior as well, but they will find anomalies that wouldn't be found in any other ways. And so machine learning is certainly a necessary part of a solution like that.
Yeah, I think it was touched on earlier. I think as the comment was, there'll always be piracy. I think my view on this is whatever we can, what we have to do is just make it more difficult for things to be pirated. There will always be piracy. So the more things we can implement, whether that's watermarking, whether that's DRM, whether that's doing things on the CDN, whether it's token authentication, the more things we can do to make it more difficult or make it easier to track down, someone who's sat there with their 4K camera recording their big TV screen, the more we can disincentivize those people who might be doing it a little bit more casually than people doing it on a grander scale, then it will drive the numbers down. But obviously there will still be those people who are doing this, I guess, professionally, if you like.
All right. Well, we are out of time, so I want to say, first of all, thank you to our panelists. You guys did a great job. This was a great discussion. A lot of questions from the audience, so thank you to everyone out there for your participation. If we didn't get your question answered, I will try and do so over the next few days. So I'll reach out to a panelist and see if I can't get an answer for you. And then again, if you've got a second, download, and hopefully have had a chance to download the paper that I posted from the Streaming Video Alliance. And finally, this will be posted, this webinar will be posted on our website, hopefully later today, but if not, tomorrow at the latest. So thank you again, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you on our next webinar in August. Take care, everybody.
Great stuff. Thanks very much.